On a Saturday evening in April 2018, a 54-year-old woman named Helena Marchetti sat at the desk in her late daughter's bedroom in Hartford, Connecticut, and signed up for an account on an online forum called CrimeThreadsDaily. She used the username AshlyMom72. She had never used a discussion forum before. She did not really know what one was. Her daughter, Ashly Marchetti, had been dead for 19 months. Ruled an accidental fentanyl overdose by the medical examiner. Ruled case closed by the Hartford Police Department. Ruled finished by every official with the authority to rule on anything. Helena did not believe any of those rulings. She had a binder, 3 inches thick, of inconsistencies she had been compiling for 19 months. And she had recently read an article that mentioned forums where amateur investigators discussed cold cases. She made her first post that night. It was titled, "I think my daughter was killed. The police won't reopen the case. Can anyone help me understand the evidence?" 2 years later, on the strength of what was discovered in the responses to that thread, the Hartford Police Department reopened the case. The FBI joined the investigation, and a man who had never appeared in the original police file was arrested and charged with Ashly Marchetti's murder. This is the story of those 2 years. Helena Marchetti was not, by any obvious metric, the kind of person you would expect to crack a homicide investigation. She was a part-time school administrator who had left full-time work 15 years earlier to care for her mother through a long illness and had never returned. She had no background in law enforcement, no background in forensics, no background in journalism. She had grown up in Hartford, married a man named Tony Marchetti at 22, had a daughter at 24, and had lived, by her own self-description, the most ordinary life that any city block in this country produces. She was not technologically sophisticated. She did not own a smartphone until 2016. The desk she sat at the night she signed up for CrimeThreadsDaily had belonged to her daughter, and the laptop on the desk had also belonged to her daughter. Helena had begun using it because she could not bring herself to give the device away. What Helena had, that the institutional investigators did not, was 26 years of knowing Ashly. She knew Ashly's voice on a phone call, the specific way Ashly used punctuation in text messages, the names of every friend Ashly had ever mentioned at the dinner table, the layout of Ashly's apartment from the dozen-plus visits Helena had made there, and a single specific instinct that nothing in the version of Ashly's death she had been told added up. Ashly had not used opioids. Ashly had not been around people who used opioids. Ashly had been in a phase of life, finishing her master's degree, working at a downtown architecture firm, talking about moving to Boston, that did not match the trajectory the police report described. Helena's instinct could have been wrong. Mothers' instincts about their dead children's lives are statistically not always reliable. Helena understood this. She had spent 19 months trying to make her instinct align with the official record. She could not. By April 2018, she had stopped trying. She had decided that if the official record could not explain her daughter's death, she would build her own. Ashly Marchetti was found unresponsive in her apartment on the morning of September 11, 2016, by a building maintenance worker who had been called to check the unit after Ashly's employer reported her absent from work for 2 consecutive days. She was 26 years old. The cause of death, established by the Hartford medical examiner, was acute fentanyl toxicity. The death was classified as accidental. The Hartford Police Department assigned the case to a detective named Marcus Bennett, who interviewed Ashly's parents, her 2 roommates from the apartment building, none of whom had seen her on the night of her death, her supervisor at the architecture firm, and 2 friends whose contact information appeared in her phone records. The detective's investigation lasted 31 days. The conclusion was that Ashly had obtained an unknown quantity of fentanyl from an unidentified source, ingested it in her apartment, and overdosed. There was no evidence of forced entry, no evidence of an assault, no evidence of a third party present at the time of death. The case was officially closed on October 12, 2016. Helena and Tony Marchetti, in the weeks following the closure, made several formal requests to have the case reviewed. They wrote to the police department 3 times. They wrote to the city council. They wrote to the state attorney's office. Each response acknowledged the family's grief and explained, in carefully measured language, that the medical examiner's findings and the investigative work supported the accidental classification. By April 2017, the official file had been closed for 6 months. There was no plan to reopen it. While the official investigation was completing its 31 days and closing, Helena Marchetti was beginning a different investigation. She did not call it that at the time. She called it writing things down. She started 2 weeks after Ashly's death with a notebook in which she recorded every fact she could verify about her daughter's last 48 hours. The notebook grew. Within 3 months, it was a binder. Within 9 months, it was 3 binders. What Helena recorded in those binders was almost entirely composed of small inconsistencies, things that individually were easy to dismiss. Collectively, they had the quality of a pattern. She recorded that Ashly's apartment, when she had first entered it 3 days after the death, had been almost too tidy. Ashly was not a tidy person. Ashly's living room had always had stacks of magazines and architectural drawings spread across the coffee table. The apartment, when Helena entered it, had no such stacks. The coffee table was clear. The kitchen counter was clear. The bedroom, when Helena entered the bedroom, had its bed made. Ashly did not make her bed. Helena had teased her about this for years. She recorded that Ashly's phone records, which Helena had eventually been able to obtain copies of through her own legal representation, showed a text message exchange with a man identified only by a first name, Jared, in the 48 hours before her death. The exchange consisted of approximately 14 messages. The content of the messages in Helena's reading was tense. There were references to having said too much and needing to talk in person. The detective, when Helena asked about Jared, had told her that Jared had been identified, interviewed by phone, and had had nothing of investigative value to add. He had not been formally interviewed in person. She recorded that Ashly's laptop, when she finally was able to log into it 9 months after her death. She had been guessing at the password until she finally tried Ashly's college roommate's middle name, and the laptop opened, had its browser history almost entirely cleared. The most recent entries were innocuous: a recipe site, a clothing retailer, a news article about a downtown restaurant. The history before September 8, 2016 was simply gone. Helena did not know what should have been there. She knew her daughter spent significant time online for work and for research, and a completely cleared browser history with only 3 recent entries did not match her sense of how Ashly used the laptop. These were the kinds of observations a mother makes. They were not, by themselves, the kinds of observations that build a case. Helena understood this. She wrote them down anyway. In the year between April 2017 and April 2018, the official investigation into Ashly Marchetti's death produced exactly 1 line of new activity: a routine administrative review conducted as part of an annual audit of closed cases, which confirmed the original classification and closed the file again. The detective who had handled the case, Marcus Bennett, was promoted to a supervisory role in late 2017 and no longer carried individual case files. The Marchetti file moved into the cold but classified accidental tier, which is the tier of files that the department considered, for institutional purposes, to be resolved rather than cold. There was no investigator assigned. There was no plan for further review. There was nothing. Helena Marchetti was aware that this was the official status because she called the Hartford Police Department information desk approximately once every 2 months for the entire year. The desk staff knew her by name. They were, in her later testimony, patient and kind every time. They also could not give her any information that was not already in the file because there was no new information. The article that mentioned CrimeThreadsDaily had appeared in a regional magazine that Helena had read in a dentist's waiting room in late March 2018. The article was about a different case, a hit and run in another state that had been solved when an online community had identified the make and model of a partially photographed vehicle. The article quoted one of the forum's moderators, who described the community as 5,000 amateur investigators with day jobs and a shared obsession with cases the system has stopped looking at. Helena had folded the page and taken it home. She had read it 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. On Saturday, April 14, 2018, she sat down at her daughter's laptop and typed the forum's URL. Her first post was uploaded at 8:47 p.m. The title was, "I think my daughter was killed. The police won't reopen the case. Can anyone help me understand the evidence?" The post itself was 1,100 words. It described, in clear and chronological order, Ashly's life and circumstances at the time of her death, the official cause of death and case closure, the cleared apartment, the cleared browser history, the text message exchange with Jared, the family's unsuccessful attempts to have the case reviewed. Helena did not editorialize. She did not speculate. She listed what she knew, what she did not know, and what she was hoping someone could help her understand. She received 6 replies in the first hour. By the next morning, the post had 24 replies. By the end of the first week, it had 143 replies, including responses from 3 users who identified themselves with verifiable credentials. In private messages, Helena later confirmed as a retired homicide detective in Massachusetts, a current forensic chemist in California, and a digital forensic specialist who had worked on contract for 2 state attorneys' offices in the southeastern United States. The digital forensic specialist, whose forum handle was Dig Forensic Mike, sent Helena a private message on April 22, 2018 with the following 2 sentences. A cleared browser history with 3 innocuous entries is not natural. It is a wipe. A wipe means someone was in the apartment after she died, and they were looking for something on her computer. Over the 7 months between May and December 2018, the CrimeThreadsDaily thread on Ashly Marchetti's case grew to over 4,000 replies. A subset of the forum's users, approximately 12 people who had introduced themselves as having relevant professional backgrounds, began coordinating in a private message group with Helena. They divided up tasks. One user, a paralegal in Pennsylvania, walked Helena through the legal process for obtaining additional records via formal request rather than informal inquiry. Another user, a financial analyst in Texas, helped Helena trace a single bank deposit in Ashly's account from August 2016 that the family had never been able to explain. A deposit of $3,400 from a business account belonging to a company called Pellinor Consulting. The deposit had been described in the official investigation as consistent with normal employment income. Pellinor was not a registered employer of Ashly's, but the detective accepted Ashly's mother's note that Ashly had occasionally done freelance work. The financial analyst, doing what he later described as 10 minutes of basic corporate records work, determined that Pellinor Consulting was a single-member LLC registered to an address in Hartford, Connecticut, owned by a man named Jared Whitmer. Jared Whitmer was Ashly's Jared from the text message exchange. Jared Whitmer had not been mentioned in the official investigation as anyone other than a friend who had been phone interviewed and cleared. He had not been described as a former or current business associate. He had not been described as the owner of a company that had paid Ashly a substantial sum of money 1 month before her death. The forum users continued. The retired homicide detective in Massachusetts, who had been carefully reviewing the chronology Helena had posted, raised the question of whether Jared Whitmer had ever been formally interviewed beyond the phone call. The paralegal in Pennsylvania walked Helena through how to formally request the audio recording or notes from Jared Whitmer's police interview. The request, filed in August 2018, produced a response. The phone interview with Jared Whitmer had been documented in a 2-paragraph note in the case file. The note recorded that Whitmer had been a friend of Ashly's, that the relationship had been casual, and that he had not seen her in the 2 weeks prior to her death. The bank deposit was made 9 weeks before Ashly's death. The text messages, which the forum users now also had Helena formally re-request and obtain in full content rather than just metadata, included one exchange 4 days before Ashly's death, in which Ashly wrote, "I'm not comfortable with what you're asking. I need to talk to someone about this." Whitmer's reply, "Please don't do anything until we talk in person." Helena Marchetti printed every message, every record, every forum analysis. She put them in a new binder. She labeled the binder Jared Whitmer. In January 2019, Helena Marchetti and her husband Tony retained a private attorney named Lillian Park. Lillian Park had been recommended by one of the CrimeThreadsDaily users. She specialized in civil litigation on behalf of victims' families and had a long-standing professional relationship with 2 assistant U.S. attorneys in the Connecticut Federal District Office. Lillian Park reviewed the materials Helena had compiled. She spent 46 billable hours doing so. At the end of that review, she wrote a memo to the Marchettis recommending that, Rather than continue trying to persuade the Hartford Police Department to reopen the case, they should request a federal review on the basis of evidence tampering. Specifically, the cleared browser history, which suggests that someone other than Ashly had been in the apartment after her death. The federal review request was filed in March 2019. It was accepted in April. An FBI special agent named Teresa Ortiz was assigned to do an initial review. She read the materials over 2 weeks. She then requested the original police file from Hartford, the laptop, which was now a 16-month-old laptop in a mother's home, still preserved as Helena had left it after the forum users had urged her never to use it again, and the original physical evidence from the apartment. The forensic re-examination of the laptop, conducted by the FBI's Digital Forensics Laboratory in June 2019, confirmed the wipe. It also recovered through advanced data recovery techniques that had not been applied during the original investigation, fragments of the browser history. Among the fragments were searches conducted in the 72 hours before Ashly's death. Searches related to corporate financial fraud, searches related to whistleblower legal protections, and 3 visits to a website operated by a regional investigative journalism nonprofit. Ashly Marchetti, in the days before her death, had been preparing to expose something. The forensic examiners could not determine, from the recovered fragments alone, exactly what she had been preparing to expose. But the financial analyst's work on the forum had already established what Pellinor Consulting was. The federal investigators expanded the file. Jared Whitmer was arrested in November 2019, 2 years and 2 months after Ashly Marchetti's death, and approximately 19 months after Helena Marchetti's first forum post. He was charged with murder, evidence tampering, and obstruction of a federal investigation. The federal involvement was secured on the basis of the financial fraud nexus the investigation had uncovered. Pellinor Consulting, the federal prosecutors alleged, had been a vehicle for laundering proceeds from a kickback scheme involving Whitmer and 3 other individuals in the construction industry. Ashly had discovered the scheme through her work at the architecture firm, which had been retained by one of the companies Pellinor was laundering money through. Ashly had been in the process of preparing to report what she had found to either federal investigators or the investigative journalism nonprofit when she died. The fentanyl had been administered by Whitmer during what Ashly believed was a meeting to discuss her concerns. He had cleared her apartment afterward, wiped the laptop, and left. Whitmer was convicted in 2022 after a trial that lasted 8 weeks and in which the prosecution called 14 witnesses, including 3 users from CrimeThreadsDaily, who testified about the forum's role in identifying the evidence. He was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. 2 of his co-conspirators in the underlying financial fraud scheme pleaded guilty before trial. The Hartford Police Department, in the wake of the conviction, conducted an internal review of the original investigation. The review concluded that the original investigation had been procedurally sufficient but substantively limited. Detective Marcus Bennett was not formally disciplined. The internal review did, however, lead to a policy change. In cases where a family member of the deceased disputes the manner of death classification, the case is now subject to a 6-month grand jury review by a second investigator before being closed. That policy change is, in its own way, the institutional acknowledgement that the original system had not worked. Helena Marchetti gave one extended public interview after the verdict. It was published in a national magazine in early 2023. She was 60 years old by then. She had aged, the interviewer wrote, in the way that sustained grief ages a person. Not catastrophically, but visibly, in the corners of the eyes and the slight stoop of the shoulders. She talked about the binders. She talked about the forum. She talked about the night she had typed her first post and not slept until 5:30 the next morning because the replies kept arriving. She talked about the people on the forum she had never met in person, several of whom had become, over the years of the investigation, something close to her closest friends. She talked about her daughter, at length and with specificity, the way she had been writing about her daughter in the binders for years. The interviewer asked her, near the end of the conversation, whether the verdict had brought her closure. She said, "Closure is a word the system uses when it wants the case to be over. I do not want the case to be over. The case is the last thing in my life that is about my daughter. When the case ends, my daughter ends, and I am not ready for that. So I do not have closure. I have an answer. The two things are not the same. The interviewer asked in the final exchange whether she had any message for the forum users who had helped her. She said, "I have already told them. I will tell them again. They did what an entire police department with budgets I cannot imagine and powers I cannot use did not do. They did it on nights and weekends, on their phones at lunch, on laptops in basements. They were people I had never met. They believed me when I said something was wrong. That is the entire story. They believed me. The laptop is still in Ashly's bedroom. Helena has not removed it from the desk. The federal investigators returned it after the trial concluded, and Helena placed it back where it had been before any of this began. The bedroom is otherwise mostly the way Ashly left it, though the bed is now made. Helena makes it once a week when she cleans the room, which she still does on Saturday afternoons, with the door open and the radio on in the kitchen, the way it was when Ashly was alive and visiting on weekends. The laptop screen is dark. The cord is plugged in. If you open the lid, the screen would still light up. Helena has not opened the lid in 5 years. She is, by her own description, not yet ready to find out whether she might want to write on it.